a very distinctive and significant asset of our state. It's unique because it's the only state seal that features a map of its domain. And it's unusual that it's the only seal that recognizes and includes the names of its neighboring states. Obviously, it's distinctive, it's easily recognized, it stands out from other state seals. Well, I've long been interested in map design and how type and the shape of forms that are presented on maps can convey visual ideas and information. It's worth noting that maps are like portraits of people. They feature the distinctive features of their subject. Thus, maps are a unique and special kind of visual idea, especially because many early maps are created to be used for a specific purpose or a specific user or a type of user. For examples, let's see. For many centuries, the coastal regions on maps are typically far more detailed and accurate than the inland areas, because most maps at this time are made for captains of sailing ships, and they're quite willing to pay for the most accurate available coastal navigation charts in order to keep their ships from running onto uncharted rocks. And the design of these maps has always intrigued me, especially the maps that are made between the years 1750 and 1850. This is an era of enormous change in map making. For centuries, decades before, maps are engraved. They're printed from ink, pulled from laboriously created features that are literally carved, letter by letter, feature by feature, into a metal engraving plate. Thus, engraved maps are often quite expensive. They take a lot of time and energy, like this one, and skill to make. However, after about 1800, the lithograph map comes into wider use, and especially color printing after 1850, like this geology map of Alabama. Made with special inks printed from an unusual oil water sensitive stone, the lithograph map is far easier, A, to create, to update, to print, and compared to earlier engraved maps that required far more time and effort and skill to make, it's much easier to make. It's more efficient. So today we have a multitude of maps made for very specific needs. For example, we can contrast the purpose of highway maps, like that focus on man-made features, with the purpose of National Geographic maps that emphasize natural features, like our map that features streams and mountains. Different purposes, different designs. Well, in my first early research about the Alabama seal, I quickly learned that our current, very familiar four-color design is not the first design for the seal of Alabama. That colorful, eye-catching design dates from the 1950s, after the Second World War, when large-scale, color lithograph printing becomes commercially feasible and broadly available. That colorful design evolves actually from this distinctive black and white design that is adopted in 1939. This black ink design is the official design for the seal of Alabama at this time until after the Second World War. Notice that the perimeter words are different. Alabama Great Seal in place of State of Alabama. Notice also the labels identifying the 9 major river systems up in here are now featured on our great, I'm sorry, I've got myself mixed up here. I wanted to say down to the Conecuh River. There are 9 rivers, as opposed to the 14 river basins of Alabama. The 9 rivers that are on there are just a selection. They're the main ones, but these fertile river basins are certainly one of the most distinctive features of our state, and they're certainly quite appropriate to be featured on the seal of Alabama. But they do raise the question, who did this? Who decided to put Alabama's rivers on our seal? Who had the brilliant idea to feature this unusual and distinctive asset of Alabama on the seal of Alabama? And why and how was this decision made? Well, this is the man, come on. This is the man that's responsible. He made this decision, William Wyatt Bibb, in February 1818, just after his appointment as the first governor of the Alabama Territory. William Wyatt Bibb writes a letter to the U.S. Department of State asking it to provide an official seal for the new territory to certify the authenticity and authority of the official documents of the new territory. These included three kinds of documents that were needed at this time. Documents transferring public lands to private owners. Documents that were official appointments of officials, government officials to perform duties within and to operate the new territory. We'll see one of these shortly. And the governor's certifications of the new laws that are passed by the legislature to affirm that they're authentic. In this letter that Bibb writes to the Secretary of State in February of 1818, you can see here the phrase, he suggests that the map of the territory with its principal rivers be an impression, that be the impression on the seal. And then Bibb adds, a map or design will be handed to you by our delegate. The text of this letter is very well known. It's published in numerous documents about the founding of our state and about the materials that are held in the National Archives. However, the model map that is mentioned in this letter is never mentioned again in any later historical document. Well, as a newcomer to Alabama with an interest in maps, I became curious and about this Alabama seal featuring a map and began asking questions about it. Nobody could show me what it looked like. This led me to conclude that the map on the first seal of Alabama had never been reproduced. Otherwise, somebody would have seen it. Well, my curiosity and my persistent questions did, however, stimulate interest in finding a map. And fortunately, the Archives Department of Archive and History has several early documents that bear these, what I call invisible seals, embossed into the paper of these documents, and it had recently acquired a new high-resolution scanner that could essentially take a good image of these. In this overall view here, we see one of these early documents, the February 1819 appointment of a court official in Autauga County, signed here by Governor William Wyatt Bibb. And now look at the lower left area, and particularly notice this crease. I asked the archive staff to see if they could make a scan of this. Meredith McDonough offered to try to scan this little invisible seal. And as I mentioned before, this vertical crease on that old fold we will see in this next view, which is a detail made by Meredith of that tiny seal, much enlarged. And at the left, you can relate it to the prior image by noticing that vertical seal. And also notice in the next view that the contrast can be enhanced to increase the visibility of minute variations in details. In other words, to make them easier to see, there are some pale features in the next view that are made to appear darker than your eye would actually see them. And here you can see Meredith's detail scan of the tiny seal, much enlarged, I hasten to tell you. It's about, it's less, almost a little bit larger than the diameter of a silver dollar, or its diameter is about the height of a dollar bill. So it's a tiny fellow. At the left, you can see that vertical crease. And also, you can see the river routes going south to the Gulf of Mexico. Some very carefully carefully lettered relief labels that identify the rivers and neighbors like Florida down here. And they're tiny symbols for forts that you can just barely make out in this view along here. And dotted lines for boundaries. like this western boundary here, and there's another one over here for an Indian boundary.
Does the embossing stamp still exist in this impression?
To my knowledge, it does not exist. But we do have in the collection of the archives a contemporary seal for a planters and merchants bank in Huntsville in 1816, I think it is. But my impression is that at the time of needs for high quality metal, redundant seals were often candidates in time of war for loose metal collections. Does that make sense?
It became a bullet.
In a word, right. But we soon realized as well in looking at this tiny map that it has some quite intriguing, if not puzzling, details. For instance, south of the Tennessee River, you can just barely make out some of the letters here, and when I point them out, you may realize they're inverted. The word for Tennessee is placed as if to be read from Nashville. And also, the location of the Tombigbee River is not quite geographically accurate. Its start is misplaced in northwest Alabama. It should be over here in northern Mississippi. And as a side, we can note this mislocation of the Tombigbee River may someday prove to be a blessing in disguise. On that future day, when we find an early map of this area showing a similar mislocation of the Tombigbee, this may be strong evidence that we have found the origin map used by Governor Bibb to create the map that he sends to the State Department that we'll see shortly. But the point is, because of this geographic error, it might be easier to identify the map that it was made from. Well, back to the scan. Notice along the left borderline, right in here, at the angle of the Mississippi-Alabama border, there is a larger open circle. Later, we'll see this open circle again. Well, all of these features are interesting because this map is one of the first maps made of our new state. Thus, it shows firsthand what people thought were important at this time. For example, in this much, much enlarged detail, there is some faint lettering that you can make out right here. O-F-R-E, and then blur, 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 blur. And I puzzled over this for, at least several nights after dinner and a week or so, and looking in vain for a matching name on an old or on current maps, and scans of other seals on later documents like this. Sorry. Gotta get my right toy. Like this later impression on an 1839 seal, you can see this label right down here again. And also note this is a later form of the seal that is put on foil paper with serrated edges. And it took me a long time to find out why they put the serrated edges on it. You made the seals in sort of a production line. And the serrated edge was to keep that seal from being violated, and if it was, you would notice that the edges had been tampered with. That's why these foil maps have that serrated edge. Well, back to the dotted line and the lettering there. One day lightning struck. This tantalizing word didn't begin with an O, it begins with F. The word is F-R-E-N-C-H and identifies the location, marked by another open circle, of the short-lived settlement for French refugees who were settled near Demopolis just after the Napoleonic Wars in Europe. Well, this was exciting. This was finding new facts. This made me ask more questions, such as the who question. Who made this little map? Well, fortunately, State Department archives record and identify the maker of the first seal of Alabama that bears our little map. The Alabama map maker is Morris First, who was born in Europe, as you see here, of a Jewish family, and is trained as an engraver, becoming to the young United States in 1808. He lives in Philadelphia for several decades, where he creates coin designs for the National Mint, made our Alabama map in 1818, and became famous for making congressional medals honoring naval war heroes of 1812, like this medal seen in a much enlarged view, honoring Commodore Stephen Decatur. And notice just under Decatur's left shoulder, there's First has put his name in lettering that's very similar to that used by First to identify the features on our seal of Alabama. This reverse side shows the complex scene of the epic naval battle where Decatur earned his glory, and we can notice further elegant text lettering that complements and documents the scene, ending with the Roman numeral letters at the bottom for 1812, the year of Decatur's victory. First also was renowned for making a group of ceremonial medals honoring early presidents, as seen in this set of front and back views of First's 1825 medal honoring John Quincy Adams, sixth president. These presidential medals were commissioned by Congress to commemorate the signing of peace treaties with our Native American Indian groups. The medals were presented with great ceremony to Indian leaders at the time of the formal events celebrating the signing of these treaties. Well, now I've had enough of the who, what, why, when to put together an article about this unusual, quote, new map. And thanks to new technology and the wonderful makers of high-resolution scans of this tiny, heretofore invisible seal, I could now illustrate a previously unrecorded early map, a map that no one in Alabama knew existed. And thanks to State Department archives, I could identify Morris First as the maker of this map, possibly the first public map of Alabama. It was time to tell its story, to get this information organized in the best way possible, and to get the right illustrations to best tell the story. This process takes time and several months, and after several drafts, the article was ready to go to the patient editor at Alabama Heritage magazine. Well, then came the unexpected. Just as I was about to put this article in the mail, my wife Frances excitedly called me to come look at her computer to see something that she had found on the internet. She's much intrigued by the astonishing amount of information available there, and she likes to search it with keywords for our current projects to see what information she can find. And on my behalf, she put in the words Morris First and Jew. And here is what her search effort turned up. Two photo sets side by side. On the left, we see a July 7th, 1818 invoice by Morris First, the maker of our die, to the State Department for making the dies for the seal and getting the press for the Alabama seal. And on the right, I'm stunned by what I see. It's a photostat of what appears to be the original ink and watercolor drawing of Bibb's map showing the principal rivers of Alabama, together with a note of requested changes. Well, to make a long story short, Bibb sends this little drawing in February 18 to the State Department. State in turn sends them to the engraver Morris First to make the seal of Alabama. And on July 7th, as we see here, First sends his invoice for $450 for the seal and the press to Daniel Brent, the chief clerk at the State Department, and First earns Alabama's first preservation award for returning this little drawing with its note together with his invoice. And then Governor Bibb's little map, as we see here, and the note are filed and preserved, but not recorded, for nearly 200 years in the papers of the State Department's chief clerk, Daniel Brent, first at the State Department and then at the National Archives when the State Department papers are transferred. No one realizes that this little map is there until the American Jewish Society of Cincinnati, Ohio, orders a microfilm photostat in the 1980s of every item in the correspondence of Morris First that's in the National Archives for them to have in the Ohio Jewish Archives. Well, copies of these 2 pages of microfilm is what Francis sees on the American Jewish Society Archive site on the internet. Well, and ultimately I'm able to order this scan of Governor Bibb's little ink and watercolor drawing that's still in Daniel Brent's file in the National Archives. Asked me about the process of extracting it. And I did get it to the Alabama Heritage in time for it to be published for the first time in nearly 200 years. And the impressive amount of detailed information in this little drawing and its note of requested changes is still astonishing, and I'm finding new issues every day. It prompts me to ask new questions about Bibb's drawing. For example, what's the model for Bibb's map? What's it based on? And who's the person who actually makes this little map, who draws it? These intriguing questions are still to be answered. The writer of the little note isn't identified either. I suspect it might be Governor Bibb who writes, as we can see at the top, the word Cherokees, St. Stephen's, Fort Stoddard, Mobile, and the dotted line from Coosa down here to the Chattahoochee is to be, quote, omitted. And then he asked for 5 spelling changes. I won't go into all of them. Tombeckbee, Tuscaloosa, Coosa, Tallapoosa, Cahaba. But these are telling changes. I suggest that these are requests that may be due to Governor Bibb's anticipation of the coming changes to civil authority from military rule, from state to federal status in this transition from federal territory to the then Alabama territory. He realizes that these changes should be explicit in the image on the new seal for the new political entity, which would be the primary symbol for invoking the authority of the new territory of Alabama. And eventually, I would add, this seal is adopted by the new state. This issue of who generates these changes might be answered by comparing handwriting on this little note with documents known to be written by Bibb. This is still to be done because many of the documents of his that survive are official documents that were written by a secretary that he then signs, and there's not quite enough information there to affirm that this note is by Bibb. But there is one interesting question about this map that can be firmly answered now. And I'll put it to you in the form of a question. What can you see in this little drawing that tells us that it was made for a specific purpose? In other words, is this little ink and watercolor drawing a purpose-made map? Is it specifically created in 1818 to make the first seal of Alabama? Can this be confirmed? Well, use your eyes. Think about what you see. Raise your hand when you see the evidence. Here's a hint. Look at the words in the band around the edge. Any hands? Here's some hands. Yes, indeed, it is a purpose-made map. This map was specifically created to make the first seal of Alabama. We can say this because the perimeter band around this map says Alabama Executive Office, and these are the very specific words that are put on the seal that is then used to certify the official documents of the territory. And also, when Alabama becomes a state, this seal is adopted and used by the new state for 5 decades, and then actually during the Confederate era until 1868. During the early years of Reconstruction, a new Alabama seal featuring an American eagle and the words "Here We West" is adopted by the legislature and then used for some 70 years until 1939. I would hasten to add, this is a recent version of that seal, which when it was first known was an embossed blind stamp seal like that we've seen on the documents by Bibb. This color version, I think, dates from the 1950s. But in 1939, this young lady, Marie Bankhead Owen, then the director of the Alabama State Archives, and some of her influential friends in the Daughters of American Republic persuade the Alabama legislature and our governor to revive Governor Bibb's Alabama Rivers Features concept of the initial seal to be revived and put on a new version of the Alabama seal that we see here. And they invent this black ink design that features labeling the 9 neighbor river systems and the 4 neighboring states, and puts the term Alabama Great Seal in the perimeter band. Well, today our updated 4-color version features river routes, labels for 11 rivers with the 2 changes. There are 2 river labels added for the southern border rivers, the Perdido and the Chattahoochee on the border with Florida. And in the perimeter band, we see a slightly different text. The term State of Alabama replaces the term Alabama Great Seal. This noting of these changes completes the presentation today of the documented historic official history of the current seal. Now it's time to take an interesting look, but an unofficial image that has often been incorrectly called a seal of Alabama. It is.
Excuse me. Florida is not supposed to be red, it's supposed to be brown. Secretary of State's color seal has Florida brown, not red.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
There are, shall we say, almost innumerable variations, and you have very astutely noticed one of the more curious ones that happens in color printing when inks, shall we say, don't have the right flavors.
I had to stop a state agency from using this and make them use the right colors, and I did.
They were an obedient agency then, yes. Well done. Well, to introduce this unofficial Alabama emblem, we need some background. I would contend that because Alabama's first seal is invisible, a variety of alternates for it are invented for use in different contexts. There is no known Alabama legislation or governor's executive order setting the specifications of this unofficial emblem. And so consequently, the details of various images of this emblem vary enormously. The image, though, of a tree and a map of Alabama is the basic theme of this unofficial emblem. The origin of this image may go back to the Connecticut charter oak tradition, in which early Connecticut settlers hid their colony's royal charter in a big oak tree to keep the charter from being seized by a defiant military unit. In Alabama images of this theme, the map may be flat or a scroll, as seen here, or leaning against the tree or hanging from the tree. I would ask you to look, though, at the dotted west border. Notice the open circle at the angle point, and I suggest that this goes back to the comparable open circle that we first noticed in the invisible embossed map of Morris First. Here's the earliest known image of the Alabama map and tree emblem. It's on the 1846 title page of a primary level History of the United States, within a perimeter design featuring the state seals of 26 states. And here at the bottom right, and a detail here, is the image published for Alabama, a view of an Alabama map leaning against a tree. The river routes and Gulf waters are barely indicated on this map. More interesting are the labels. At the lower left, we see map/Alabama, and flanking the west and east borders are labels for Mississippi and Georgia. These two labels are significant. They're the earliest known instance of a map in this context that features the names of Alabama's neighbors. Military buttons of this era show yet another version of the unofficial Alabama map against a tree, as seen in this button of an 1860s militia soldier. Notice again, there's that familiar open circle at the angle of the western border. And here's another version of the Alabama map against a tree that's seen in this detail from an 1866 illustration in Harper's Weekly. Here, the scrolled state map, labeled with the Gulf of Mexico, is shown together with a second scroll in the foreground that you can just barely make out, is probably labeled Constitution. The political context for this juxtaposition of state documents is more evident when we look at the overall scene for this oval map image. It's the center of the header of a Reconstruction era map of Alabama, and shown between the scenes of cotton picking on the left and mule carts bearing cotton bales on the right. The wide popularity, though, of the Alabama map against a tree image is seen in the next slide, where it is invoked in an official context. This is a Confederate banknote for $1,000 issued in May 1862 to raise funds, as you can see at the top, for payment of Confederate war tax. Notice an unusual feature of this document. It bears not one, but two emblems. In the header, we see the familiar unofficial Alabama map against a tree emblem, and at the lower left, in the open circle area, is the second, Alabama's official 1818 embossed seal on the Alabama rivers as created by Morris first. This detailed view of the May 1862 banknote shows this embossed impression, and we might note that this invisible seal is used on three different entities of Alabama: the Alabama Territory, the state of Alabama, and lastly by the Confederate state of Alabama and the Confederate United States as well. In the header of the 1862 banknote, we see this familiar unofficial emblem, and I suspect that the public's greater familiarity with this unofficial symbol from publications and as the device on military uniforms may be the reason that this official map against a tree is invoked on this unofficial document. Well, this is just one aspect of the unofficial Alabama seal/emblem/symbol. It's a big story, and their full dimensions are still being discovered. Well, in closing, we should commend three people for establishing the historic character of the distinctive seal of Alabama. Morris first, as I mentioned, for creating the first seal in 1818, Marie Bankhead Owen for reviving and restoring the singular design in 1939, and most certainly Governor William Wyatt Bibb for his foresight in recognizing the exceptional significance of Alabama's waterways. As one historian has said, in featuring Alabama's main rivers in the design of our state seal, Governor William Wyatt Bibb forever imprinted the strategic importance of its rivers to Alabama's future. Well, thank you. This concludes my talk today about the historic origins of the seal of Alabama. I hope what you've heard is not too confusing or too boring. I know there are a number of loose ends still to be pursued, but now I'm ready for your questions.
I'm going to ask that you please wait for the microphone so that we can record your questions. If you have questions, please raise your hand.
2 or 3 years ago, we had a very fine talk by an instructor on surveying from AUM who led a team who resurveyed the South Florida boundary between Alabama and West Florida. I wonder if you have talked to him or other surveyors in terms of the potential for finding surveying marks in that original map.
Survey marks on the map?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, in my okay.
Maybe an indication of where a survey stone may be implanted.
Okay. In my examination, not of the original, but of the large-scale, high-resolution scan that I ordered at not inconsiderable expense from the National Archives, I looked very carefully along those border lines, and I could see no indication of any feature that might be identified as essentially a marker stone. For example, I'm very familiar with the marker point in Madison County that's the initial point for the Huntsville Meridian. This is a point that was established in November 1807 by Thomas Freeman when he did the first survey of Madison County and established the initial point for the meridian of then Madison County. Subsequently, in 1814, that point was extended south to meet a horizontal line that is now called the Freeman Line, that is essentially the boundary between the St. Francis Line and the... But my point is that that initial point of the Huntsville Meridian on the 35th parallel, I'm trying to remember the miles, but it is not marked on the map, but it's one of the few initial points or boundary points that has been essentially resurveyed and established. Is that... I'm telling you my ignorance by telling you one that I do know.
Oh, okay. But you don't know about that one circle there at that west boundary?
That, to my knowledge, does not have any distinctive ground marks. It's distinctive, in my opinion, to the the embossed map created by First, and then it is replicated and sustained in these various later versions, which to me affirm that the invisible map was studied and people looked at it to essentially make versions of it. Does that make sense?
Right, but I was wondering whether early survey efforts may have contributed to the original drawing of the map, which is now in
all right. The next boundary after 1807 that I'm aware of that was actually surveyed is the so-called Ellicott line between what was then Alabama territory and Spanish Florida. There are several stones from that survey that have been relocated, I shouldn't say, re-identified, and companion stones, new ones, put down to positively identify them. The boundary line between Alabama and Georgia that essentially goes from Nickajack to the headwaters of the Chattahoochee, to my knowledge, doesn't have any surviving markers. Other questions?
Yes, thank you for your article and talk. I had a question about the river names and the changes, and you touched on some, but it seems to me when Governor Bibb sent the original sketch that the Tom Bigby River was spelled like we do today, and the Black Warrior River was on. Now, when it came back from Philadelphia as a seal, it was Tom Beckby and Tuscaloosa. And then in 1939...
But it was, those changes were following the requested statement of changes that maybe I didn't make that clear. The difference between the drawing and the embossed image is, how can I say, particularized in those changes that are requested in the little 17-line label. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but that was a request by the governor, even after.
We think. I don't know.
Okay, so then why in 1939, when they flipped back, was the spelling back to Black Warrior and Tom Bigby instead of Tom Beckby?
Good question. I think, without really knowing, I suspect that some politicians are behind it. Terrible thought. Yes, sir. There's a question there. Yeah.
Mine is in the same vein.
Say again?
My question is in the same vein.
Yes.
When Governor Bibb requested the change from Coosa and Tallapoosa to Coosa and Tallapoosa, do you have any idea what the reason was?
That little note is, how could I say, a source of multiple mysteries. I would add to that, why are the Cherokees deleted and the Creeks remain? Why do the fort symbols remain even though they're no longer active? There's one in the Tennessee River called Fort Hampton that was specifically established to literally keep white settlers out and to protect the Indians. It's abandoned by 1795. And so there's a lot of mysteries in this little map that I must say have kept me well occupied and out of the malls. Question here.
I'll have to wait for the microphone.
Yeah, it's coming.
Why in the world was the state seal changed in whenever you said it was for about the next 70 years?
1868.
Is that Reconstruction?
That is an issue that I can answer in saying, yes, it was during a period of Reconstruction. I've yet to find documentation that essentially accompanies the legislation that essentially gives the reason for the changes. But my suspicion is that at the time there was an effort to essentially eradicate anything that was prior history, including this early seal that was very distinctive. And obviously, an eagle is more substantive at a federal level than an Alabama map. And so to affirm, yeah.
The national federal emblem.
So it's an invocation of an image to affirm a new national status.
So the Yankees thought it was politically incorrect.
There you go.
Well put, sir. Other questions? The lady here in front.
I'm certainly out of my league here, but I would just posit that perhaps the ending IE changed to A on the two rivers, Coosa and Tallapoosa, was to reflect the feminine gender from Latin, and rivers are feminine.
Well put. It is, how could I say? It is always amazing the new reasons that can be positively identified for name changes. From the very logical to the very trivial that there was a spouse's name that was being demeaned and etc. Other questions? Yes.
In an old news clip, I read that the ladies who influenced Mrs. Owens to try to have the seal changed back were from the UDC and not the DAR.
Oh, really?
That's
Interesting. Well, this is an issue that obviously needs to be tracked down, and several people have said, well, why don't you put this all down in a book? And I said, wait a minute, there are a lot of loose ends, and this is one of the loose ends. Is it the DAR or the UDC? Did everybody understand the point? That it's a different political allegiance that's involved. I will be glad to follow that up. Is that article in the state archives here, or do you?
I don't know, I have a copy of it, I'll see if I can dig it up.
It would be appreciated. Thank you. One last question, I think, and then we're pretty close to when people want to quit. Yes.
On the record here, I certainly wondered. I thought you mentioned French settlers. I thought you were pointing to.
I'm sorry.
I thought you were pointing to the southern part of the state, but then you saw another photo of the seal, and I could see the river named, or whatever it is, named French, was indeed over there toward the west part of the state where the French did settle.
Oh, yes.
Is that a river?
I'm satisfied it is not. I hope I've not confused people. Let me go back and say the words that took me 2 weeks to identify, that is, I thought were the letter O, F-R-E, were not a word beginning with O. It's a word beginning F-R-E and then F-R-E-N-C-H, but it identifies the location of the federal lands that were appropriated and designated to be occupied by a group of French exiles after the war, Bonaparte loyalists, literally. If I answered your question, it was not to be a river, it was specific.
Well, although it was in the same sort of type as identifies most of the rivers, although some of the rivers are capitalized, it's analogous to the Creek and the Cherokee.
Exactly. You're right on. Yeah. One last question. Y'all done good. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it.